Good evening. We'll call this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the November 28th, 2018 Board of Schools Trustees, Richmond Community Schools. And we will begin, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'd ask everyone to please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I am convening the meeting at this time in place of President Darren Galsky, who will be here shortly. And according to the agenda, we will begin with the reading of the Statement of Mission and the Vision Statement, please.
Richmond Community Schools guide students on pathways of learning to a future of limitless possibilities.
Vision Statement. Richmond Community Schools, a community nurturing mind, body, and spirit to prepare students for a life of choice, purpose, and service.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Debbie. At this time, we will go to our celebrations and reflections by the board and superintendent.
This evening, I'd like to welcome Dr. Hartley to the podium. Sorry, Dr. Hartley, I put that down, making it look like you are much taller than you are. But if you would come up to the front. Dr. Reynolds told me to. I'm just going to leave it there.
I got you.
But Dr. Hartley is going to bring us a presentation tonight about elementary education.
Alrighty. So obviously we have 6 elementaries in a limited amount of time, and so it can only, there are a lot of great things. There's a lot of hard work, as you all know, that goes on, great teachers, great principals, and so we really had to choose to focus on one aspect of that for tonight. And so we have a short video that was put together by Mrs. Phillips from Charles and her staff that focuses on how we're supporting some of our reluctant readers. It's something that a few years back Richmond had as part of their curriculum, and after some conversation with Kirsten about this time last year, we looked at ways of getting this back for our kiddos, because we really felt like it was a way to help those readers. And so we've, through a combination of Title I grant, some early literacy grant monies, we funded this 100% through grant dollars. And so we're going to watch the video, and then I'm going to let Kirsten talk just a little bit about that, if you would. So, sir, if you would, thank you.
For the 2018-19 school year, Charles Elementary received a leveled literacy intervention known as LLI. It contains 5 color-coded systems with up to 192 lessons each. Due to the many components, it took time to organize each lesson with text, word lists, picture cards, writing books, vocabulary books, and poetry books. Our teachers found text levels for their students using benchmark assessments. Students were identified for intervention using these assessments, as well as their NWEA scores and teacher recommendations. By the end of August, we began our tiered intervention. Each Title I para currently meets with 5 groups of up to 4 students daily. The intervention lessons take place 4 times a week for 30 minutes during reading success time. These lessons use high-quality texts, are scripted, and provide instruction in reading, writing, and phonics and word study. There are multiple copies of books for our students to take home to practice reading skills. The classroom teacher is monitoring student progress with fresh read assessments every 2 weeks. Every other Tuesday, our teachers meet in grade level teams with Mrs. Phillips, the principal, and Mrs. Weber, the instructional coach. We evaluate student progress and discuss which students to add, remove, or send to the next tier. Our goal is to move our students to grade level performance in fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, and written response. Here at Charles, we are grateful for our paras Janet Eagles, Roxanne Hollingsworth, and Ann Prather. The relationships they build and instructional support they provide for our students in small group settings are key to literacy success. It's common to hear our students get excited about coming to LLI groups because they know they are receiving the support they need.
I
have to give credit to Kim Weber. She's in our next gen cadre, and you can see through iMovie she does a wonderful job with the technology integration. But it's her first year being an instructional coach, and she put that video together for me. And we have some great people. Our teachers are outstanding, but our paraprofessionals, it takes a lot to be able to look at a program like leveled literacy instruction and be able to put that in place. And they've done so graciously. I'd like to share some data that we've had so far. We have 63 kids currently in RTI, so all the kids that are in LLI are in that tier support for that reading foundation. 17 of them are in Orton Gillingham, so LLI is not the right fit for them, so we do have an alternative for that. But 44 are currently in groups. 2 second graders have moved on. They've graduated. They're at grade level so far since the end of August. 1 third grade group is working at level L, which is the same level they started on, but they're looking at text complexity and comprehension. 2 fourth grade groups are working at level O and P within chapter books. And 5 groups have moved 1 reading level, and 7 groups have moved 2 reading levels since we started at the end of August. So I'm really hopeful that we'll see great results this year with LLI and with Orton Gillingham with both interventions that we're putting in place. But it's because of our people that we have at Charles, so I can't say enough things about them. Are there any questions or?
Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Phillips or Dr. Hartley?
Dr. Hartley, how does this compare with what's happening in the rest of the buildings?
Very similar. We, in all 6 of the elementary buildings, we're using LLI kits in those manner. Part of it is, part of the LLI kits too is that it's something that one of the challenges that we run into is with our paraprofessionals, great people, but not necessarily have they had the background in reading instruction. And so this is something with some minimal PD and with teacher guidance, we can get them up and running. And sometimes we invest in the professional development for our paraprofessionals, and they decide to move on to another job opportunity. Who knows, there's some turnover there. And so there's a great return on our investment in terms of professional development for our people, but also return in learning for our kiddos, which is most important. So that's how we have it set up. We're watching and monitoring it. You can see that I think we're getting some really great results from it, and it's one piece of our overall plan to improve literacy instruction.
So, Dr. Hartley, your level literacy libraries, you talked about an investment. How did we get those?
Part of the kits, so we used grant money for this, and the kits themselves you can buy just the assessments and things like that, but we felt like it was important to go ahead and get the leveled literacy books that go along with them. It helps with that. So we did that, and it really bolstered our literacy libraries. That's part of our overall plan. We want to continue to build and grow those. They've diminished over the course of the years, and so that's part of it. We're putting that back together.
Member Robinson?
Oh, I just wanted to ask, how many levels do they go through before they reach grade level?
Well, it just depends on where they begin.
start,
Some
but-
our kids who are 3 or more levels below, they're getting Orton Gillingham, something different where that phonics instruction is important. Typically 3 levels is where that LLI support, but we're constantly monitoring. We meet every 2 weeks with the paraprofessionals, and then we have those discussions with teachers because it's really important that they complement each other, whatever reading level they're on in the classroom. It needs to complement in that intervention as well. And so, 3 levels is really good growth for a year.
I'm just thrilled we've gone back to this.
Yeah. Well, and there's a home
The
piece
video said
connection
that
too.
They meet daily?
They meet daily, 30 minutes, 4 days a week. We try to meet 5, but that Tuesday, it's really important to give our pairs that time to be able to plan because they're not, they're not teachers. We don't pay them beyond the contracted days. So it's important that we give them a little bit of time to plan, but more importantly, put the assessments and things together for the teachers so they have that a fluid line of communication so they know where what their students are doing. So.
Thank you. Member Slifer?
Literacy Collaborative was around for many years. We spent millions of dollars on it. We trained all of our staff. And we, 2 or 3 years ago, wanted to get away from it. Sounds like we're going back to it.
Not 2 or 3 years ago.
7.
We got away from that
I don't
many
know the
years
I don't know the rationale and the decision-making behind that. I'm sure there was a
Because we're
very,
talking about the same type of
yeah,
program,
a
right?
very good reason.
framework.
Yeah, but the same kind of concepts, the same kind of philosophy, the same kind of approach. It's, I think there's a lot of evidence out there that supports it. It is a costly approach, but I think it's a valid approach. It's worth the investment.
So what did we do with those? I mean, we
Yeah.
had so many level books that we couldn't even store them.
Yeah, year one, my year one here, I spent a lot of time out at Fairview, but not Fairview, Highland. Going through boxes, I went out to the bus garage. I think I ruined a couple pair of pants. But we I opened up every box I could find, every closet in all the elementaries to gather all those out and redistribute them as best as I possibly could. Obviously, there was a lot of loss. I think some buildings tucked them away just in case, and so they're in a little bit better spot than some of the others. But we've been, not just this year, but one of the things we've been trying to slowly do is to bolster those back up. So for example, last summer, or not last summer, the summer before, with a school improvement grant for Star in Vail, we were able to make a significant investment just in leveled readers to bolster those libraries.
So we talked about just the tiered readers. So are we using this in the, I don't know, general classroom?
So the intervention program, no. Those books stay with the intervention kids because we want that to be specifically designed instruction for those kids.
Right. 'Cause
But guided reading books, which are the very similar thing, we have those, and those are being used every day with
same
kids.
thing.
So it's a double dip. Those kids are getting that second piece of guided reading.
So we made, and you could tell I've been on the board long enough to know this, but we made an intentional effort to have every staff member trained in the collaborative. I guess that's what that's what I know it as.
Sure.
I don't know what the new name is today, but. So is that a direction that we're going as well again?
So I have, it is a reading adoption year, and I have a committee of teachers and coaches put together. We're meeting not next week, but the following week. And part of that is to look at and talk with teachers before we even look at materials, is to look at philosophy, to look at what we know to be good instruction. And then from that, build that filter. And after that filter is built, not looking at materials will probably be the last piece of that committee work. But prior to that, we need to look at needs and professional development, because we have a lot of young teachers in the district. And to answer your question, I don't know if it's literacy collaborative, but we do need some additional intentional professional development at not just the elementary level. I think it's the secondary levels too, in that. And so, but could it look like literacy collaborative? I would say there's a lot of components in that I believe in, and I think a lot of our teachers do too. So
I know it was hard fought from the board level to kind of walk away from it. So I think that a lot of people did believe in it.
So like I said, I don't know the rationale. I'm sure there were reasons why, and it was important. But looking at our data and looking what those teaching methods provide and the materials and what teachers talk to me and talk to principals about being good instruction. And
well, with
yeah.
me not being a reading teacher,
Sure.
I mean, logically it makes sense, but especially in the 5 different areas that you try to focus on. Good.
Member Weber?
I'm not quite sure how do we track, so how you said there were 80 kids, or did you give a number?
66.
66. So is that growing or decreasing?
My numbers are down this year, but overall, as a building, my numbers are down. So,
The percentage-wise?
yeah, but if you look at it, it's consistent at 17 to 14 kids per grade level.
Okay. And then, so do we have a sense of why they're needing intervention then?
Through the RTI process, we meet collaboratively every 2 weeks to discuss what we see. And I think I think the OG is targeting that as a whole group in kindergarten because we see it.
What is OG?
Orton Gillingham, sorry, Orton Gillingham. We see a lot of kindergartners coming in lacking phonemic awareness and phonics instruction, and so we're really trying to target that because that builds the foundation for all reading. And so we really need to get that because by third grade, which is where we're seeing them now, which is why we went to the LLI kits, if they don't have that foundation, the comprehension's not there. And so we just need to ease that transition with a little intervention and support.
Yeah,
So, yeah, we would like to see our kiddos entering into kindergarten a little more reading ready, so to speak.
and will has preschool had an impact in that number? I mean, they should be getting some of the,
It really depends on what their preschool experience is. So it's varied.
what
And so-
percentage, do we have that are in RCS preschool? Like at Charles, that would be in kindergarten? Do you know, like,
Offhand, no, I don't, sorry.
would it be around half, or,
That were RCS preschoolers? No,
yeah,
I wouldn't,
No.
yeah, no.
that's,
I
thank
feel
you,
comfortable saying that.
that's fine.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? If not, we want to thank Dr. Hartley, Ms. Phillips.
I
Yes,
just,
sir.
one more quick little shout out, and I just wanted to say thank you to Tom Brule. He's the owner of Firehouse down in the depot for what, and Carrie Ann Polk Meek and the staff at Star that showed up last Thursday to put on a community family dinner for the families of Star. It was a really neat thing. I think especially, teachers giving up part of their Thanksgiving day to be there to take care of their Star family was really heartwarming. So
Let me thank
you.
Corey
Corey was
for
there.
Stealing my bell ring.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, so we're good to go.
Okay.
Actually, we had over 20 RCS employees there
Yeah.
and fed over 200 family members
Yeah.
from the community that
And
came.
the RCS employees had their families there also, so, husbands, wives, kiddos.
Tom
We
did a
had,
great thing, yeah.
yeah, we had teachers from Hibbert. I mean, it was,
I think Kirsten was there.
Kirsten was there. I mean,
I think
so,
Board member elect was there.
yeah,
Keith?
there were quite a few, Ray from the high school, so
It's a
it
great
was
thing.
just really neat, and I think they have more planned for Christmas. It sounds like there's a Santa breakfast coming up for Star on the 22nd, so.
I hope there were a lot of pictures taken that can be shared through our website.
Yeah,
and everything.
there are tons
That's
out there,
on Facebook
Twitter
right
and
now.
Facebook, there's a
Star's
live feed
page.
from Facebook of the day, and
Great.
so really cool. And I can get you those links, so.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your presentation. Moving on, next on the agenda is the public commentary, and seeing none, we will move then to our consent items. You have at your station an addendum to human resources. You've had the opportunity, hopefully, to look through them. So at this point, we will entertain a motion to accept the consent items with the addendum as presented. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we accept the consent items with the addendum.
A motion made by Member Robinson to accept the consent items with the addendum, seconded by Member Moore. Are there any questions or comments?
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
On the payables, I guess this is for Karen. Our Amazon bill gets higher and higher. I mean, I assume we're enrolled in the Amazon Business for Education program.
Yep.
How do we manage that, just in a kind of a 1 minute?
I have two people that actually at this time of year, it takes up about 80% of their time to manage our spending and our purchasing. So very carefully, we're on there every day. We're checking to make sure that what's posted is accurate to purchase orders that have been put in. We are contacting buildings on a probably like half-hourly basis when there are changes to pricing made. So that we actually are extremely careful with those accounts. The other thing is this time of year, traditionally spending is always up because it's the end of the year. People don't know what emergencies they're gonna have January through October. So November, December look really heavy compared to the rest of the year. And Amazon this year, last year we had this happen, but I had to work through it a different way because the business education portion wasn't open yet. And so throughout this year, they've actually made quite a few improvements to their program, to where I actually had to call Amazon and request a higher level for us because our spending just has increased there. A lot of that is cost. So we actually are evaluating 3 different vendors when we look at Amazon to make sure that that pricing is going to beat our local vendors by enough to make it worth it. But we're choosing them because the price is good. So yeah.
Do they provide like an account? I mean, do we have a contact person at Amazon then?
They have a customer service area.
Okay,
that,
but not a specific.
not a specific person.
We're not that big yet.
No, but we have some pretty good names for some pretty good contacts, and we know who to ask for. So we've got a couple names that we actually request because they are most helpful to us.
Good.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right,
I've got,
Member Walton.
on 4.02, under human resources, under the paid hours off, can I get a little more of an explanation and get into a little more detail on this? I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around exactly what we're trying to do here.
Okay. So you saw the emails that went through?
Yeah,
That was sent out
we
regarding
got the update 20 minutes before the board meeting of the totals.
Yeah, that was requested by Member Slifer, and so we were able to get that information collected and get that to you. Basically what it was, on that day, I made the determination to close the district based off of half of our elementaries and half of our intermediate buildings being without power at that time, as well as much of our community. And so because of that, there are people then who were scheduled to come in, just like in other times in the past when we've had to do this, and so we have to pay them for those days, or for that day served, and so that is where we are.
What I'm struggling with is I don't know any other businesses out there that if you're scheduled to work and the building's closed or something and you don't work, that you get paid. And it's broken down here. What's the cost for admin? Are we just basically forgiving them a day on their contract, or are we going to require them to make that up at the end of the school year?
No, the practice has been that we pay, if we make that determination to close the district, that anybody who was supposed to work on that day, that we pay them for that. Now, typically, we don't do that, and there are people who have to report, and they're here. But it depends on what the situation is, if it's significant enough for the entire district.
You know,
I
it's been-
haven't seen the data. I mean, I requested it.
Right.
I just didn't expect it to be before the meeting, so I haven't seen it. I think there's an area that we maybe can have some conversation on later.
Absolutely.
But I see what Brad's saying, but we have personal days that we also offer.
We do?
So one of the questions I had is, why don't we require them to take a personal day? So there's some things that, but, you know, after I see the totals and the numbers,
Sure.
I mean, maybe that's something that we bring back for a conversation.
Right.
And those are very valid questions and points, but in the 20 years plus that I've been on the board, that has been the standard practice that has gone on. But it is something that actually.
Including
we should-
administration in that,
Yes,
even though they're on salary.
yes.
When you have a level four, what is it, 3, 4?
Getting the
Something.
levels,
Yeah, I forget how the levels go.
But it
for
is,
snow
you know,
emergency.
your concern and your question are very valid, and something that maybe we should look at in the future to have that discussion on.
We'd be more than happy to do that, too.
Because the teachers used it as a e-learning day,
Yeah,
so it counted as an instructional day for them.
right.
Yep.
What
And I can
happened,
tell you that most of the administrators were in and ended up leaving. They were in with no power and buildings and ended up leaving once we made that determination.
Checking assignments and monitoring that progress.
In the past, when the teachers had a snow day and they didn't have e-learning, Didn't they get paid for that day?
No,
Well,
they
it
had,
was added on to the end of the year.
it was added
And
on.
that's my
Okay,
come
point
back and
right
work.
there
Okay,
is
I got you.
why we're not having the contractual classifieds and admin added on.
We're not adding it on, though. We're e-learning now.
Which would be okay, except if you were a 300
Yeah,
or
no.
260-day employee. Then that creates another
We had a
problem.
similar situation last year, but it was over Christmas break, and so therefore, many of the building principals were not on contract for that day. So, that's why the difference from last year to this year is different as well.
And again, based upon past practices over the last number of years, this has been what has occurred. But I think it's a very valid point that we really need to sit down and look at, because if there's a discrepancy in the way that teachers are treated or the way that administrators are treated when it comes to this, it's something that we might really earnestly need to look at to see how do we move forward from here. But the decision that was made was based upon what has occurred over the last, in the duration of the time that I've been on the board, so.
And we would be more than happy to have that conversation and look at other options.
I'm really struggling with, I understand it's past practice, but it doesn't mean that I think it's right.
We certainly understand, your
I have some issues with this here.
I think the other thing that's important to note too is that just with the teachers being, with the e-learning day, the administrators were dealing with that as well, working with teachers, working with students. So to say that they didn't have any responsibilities that day, I don't think would be accurate either, but.
And that's what I'm having a hard time understanding, because the way we're going about this, it's like we're just paying them for a day off, but, I'm assuming the administrators are checking online, make sure the teachers have everything posted, and if there's any questions of anything coming up, they can answer any of that. It's not like they have a full free day.
No.
But the way it's kind of presented is, it is. And that's what, I'm
Yeah,
just
and
having a hard time
yeah.
getting my whole head around this thing.
I understand what you're saying. I think it's hard to, just like with our teachers, it's hard to quantify how much time did they actually put in on that day. And I don't know there's a good way to do that.
And I understand that, because we get, through e-learning, we're allowed to do it through the state, and they may not spend as much time on it that day, but they're gonna be spending that time made up on the back end through,
Yeah.
Working additional hours and grading assignments and things of that nature. And I would bet a lot of money that they're gonna spend a little extra time out of their contractual hours throughout the course of that week grading assignments and stuff that they normally wouldn't have to do.
I think it's a little different too but my conversation would lean away from the teachers because they're really a separate group. It's negotiated by
Right.
contract.
Absolutely.
They're gonna have 186 days teaching, period. I kind of equate administrators as professional salaried individuals.
Yeah.
So by us changing our concept and going back to, well, let's pay them for an extra hour's work or an extra day's work, in our world, a salary, you get paid a salary a year to do a job.
Well, I do know that from my personal perspective and professional perspective, that I know that there were administrators who were in buildings on that day because we had alarm calls that we had to respond to, and when you see them there and they're greeting you at the door or seeing their vehicles there, that they did show up. But again, I certainly think that this is something that we need as a board to earnestly look at, because your point that you're bringing up right now, that could have been brought up by a board member 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because we're going by the same standards and guidelines that we did then on the decision that was made.
Right.
So,
Member Weber?
so I guess I haven't seen the numbers either, but, and this is just for my general knowledge. So if I'm an administrator, and, I would have, did I not make my salary every week the same? I guess I don't know how the administrators are paid.
It's divided evenly over the 24 pays throughout the year.
Okay, so why is there an extra, so what does the cancellation? So how does, so what?
So the cancellation works this way. So many of them were already in buildings.
Yeah.
When power started going out. But because we didn't know how long it would take for the power to come back on, because the heat was off until after 12:30, 1 o'clock before they got heat going again.
yeah.
So the decision was made to, if they were there, to tell them they could
Okay.
go home. So,
But they would be paid regardless if they're there
That's
or at
correct.
home.
correct,
Anyway,
correct.
so why are we, I guess I don't
Why are
understand.
we
It's not additional dollars, it's dollars that were already there, so it's not costing us anything. We're just trying, the question was asked, by
Doesn't extend their
Mr.
contract. like
Slifer. No, it doesn't extend their contract at all. He just asked for a total of what it looked like if, and that's what it is.
Yeah, by employee group, actually.
Right.
So really, from my understanding, you could just leave that administrative part almost out. He asked for the
If
individual
I'm an
groups, like,
hourly employee, then I'm getting paid those hours that
Yeah.
I was not here.
Correct.
yeah. So
And,
it's
and
just-
the intention with that is to keep them from not being hurt by the fact that there was a act of nature that caused us to close the district and therefore keep them from working that day. And I do understand that businesses, it's another thing. We're not a business. We're not. You know, we're still a school corporation. We try to do what's best for our people when we can. It's not additional dollars. It was dollars that were already allocated there. And again, going by past practice, it's rare that these things happen. But when they do, we want to take care of our people and treat them right.
And the ESC overtime is additional hours over their 8-hour day?
So for the people who are here bright and early,
Sure.
cleaning the walks
Sure,
and
they do
doing
an
all
amazing
that,
job.
what we didn't want to do was, if I am a ESE 2 and I come in later and I get the 8 hours, you were an ESE 1 and you came in and worked, you should, see what I'm saying? Because then I would get 8 hours not working, you would get it, so we paid them for being there. Like a call-out would be to come in and clear the walks, and what we asked them to do is to make sure that all the walks were ready before they left. Many of them stayed to make sure the power was up. Rob, you wanna?
Right. We had technicians working that day anyway. We had maintenance managers and so forth. And then we asked them to make sure that everything was ready for the next day, because we presumed we could open up, the next day. So ESEs, stayed late to make sure things were ready. We also had a lot of dangerous trees falling and branches falling that I think it was.
Yeah, I'm not doubting the work they do. They do an amazing job with cleaning up and getting
Finish
ice
Mr.
removal
Tisdale.
and making sure that everything's
Just kind of
safe.
a call out to make sure that everything is ready and safe. And some were there by 5 a.m. On those mornings because we knew that ice was coming in. So, and we originally went to a 2-hour delay, so we had to be ready for 8 o'clock rollout, but then made the final call. So.
Member Walton, you had another comment?
No, I'm still just trying to grasp everything around it, so. I think I would like to, eventually one of these meetings or an executive session or something to have a discussion on this.
I think
stuff, so.
maybe sooner than later.
Absolutely.
Because as the, God forbid, winter weather approaches
Absolutely.
us,
I mean, it's just, for anything, just better understanding.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the way it looks here, it looks like we're paying an additional amount of money to administrators, but we're not.
That's correct.
It's part of their contractual pay that they're gonna get no matter what. And I don't doubt that they did some work remotely. I don't doubt that whatsoever, or even in the buildings, those that still had power, so.
But it's my understanding, he just gave you a breakdown for
Right.
what Jeff asked
Correct.
for. He gave him a breakdown of everything. So
Right.
so whether it's salary or not, he just gave him everything so that in case he needed anything else.
And my problem was
He was including that.
looking at this thing
Yeah.
as we're basically paying everybody for an extra day off and not having it made
Even
up.
salary, and that's not what he's
Exactly,
presenting.
that's what I was trying to
Down
prevent.
for a week because of a blizzard, are we gonna pay everyone for 40 hours?
Well, it's been a long time since we've had to encounter.
I mean, that's.
Did have a
And
week
that's where I'm getting
That's
at.
the precedent, and
And that's why it's important that we
have the conversation.
have this conversation. I mean, because if we continue with what has been the existing practice for this many years, John, then it'll, and it's something that we earnestly need to look at. I would commend and all those administrators who did brave the weather, because it was a really bad day. And if you weren't out on the roads and dealing with traffic or anything else, it was a bad day. And for those who
I was on the road to work at 7 o'clock.
yeah.
Well, and I wanted to say, during blizzards.
Four-wheel drive.
Administrators went to
Doesn't
work.
make it stop.
The only time you didn't go to
makes you
work
feel a little
is
more
when they
comfortable.
issued one of those things where you couldn't get on the
Where-
highway.
Yes.
Whatever level that is, I can't remember. Three?
Level 3.
It may have
I
been
knew it
one
was
then.
3 or
Level
4.
3.
We will get that, and all, we as the executive committee can work on that and set up a time where we can have the public discussion on that so we can get it.
Well, or maybe when you guys have that discussion, maybe the discussion should focus around data collection and formatting,
I think all of that should be included, must be included, so. If there are no other questions or comments, we have a motion and a second on the floor in regards to the consent items, so we will go ahead and, all in favor of approval of the consent items signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, thank you. Consent items are approved. We will now move to our action items, beginning with donations, and I think we'll probably call on
Mrs. Scout?
Mrs. Scalf.
Good evening. Tonight, we would like to thank the community for $14,375.06 in donations. The Dennis Intermediate School received $60 in donations from the Cincinnati Reds for their Paws store. Hibbard received numerous donations for the Life Skills Program, the Washington, D.C. trip, the Early College Program for incentives for perfect attendance, Hibbard teacher incentives, as well as student incentives, and those totaled $1,165.06. And we would like to thank Lila Brady, Heather Ashcraft, Carol Scherer, Kroger, Richmond Power and Light, Parallax Systems, Kristen Breton, and Carol Brady for those donations. The Joe Spicer Memorial Scholarship received donations totaling $300 from Barbara Hameetman and Luzerne Spicer. Nancy Tisdale, who's the daughter of Paul and Mildred Garrison, donated to the Paul, Mildred, and Nancy Garrison Scholarship an amount of $10,000. The RHS Career Center Construction Technology class received $1,200 in donations this month from Whitewater Construction, Carroll Electric, Inc., Thor Construction Company, Anderson Home Improvement, Scott Door Service, Carter Lumber, B&B Construction, First Bank Richmond, Wayne Concrete Contractors, Inc., DeKill & Son Heating and Air Conditioning, Inc., Richmond Carpet Outlet, and Milestone Contractors, LP. If you see their truck around, you will see logos for each of these businesses on that truck as a thank you to them. Community Family Funeral Home donated to the RHS girls basketball team, and Van Vliet Insurance Agency donated to the RHS wrestling team. Athletic donations totaled $1,600. Civic Hall received a donation for the Proudly Presenting Series in an amount of $50 from Charles and Marilyn Ramey. Tonight, I ask the board to approve $14,375.06 in donations.
I move that we accept the donations offered to us tonight.
We have the motion from Member Schleifer to accept the donations as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by by President Darren Galsky. Are there any questions or comments?
Member today.
I just need to say that it was neat to see Paul Garrison, who was a longtime
Yes.
superintendent here when I was a child. On there, that was a neat thing.
$14,000 is, or $10,000 is a very nice contribution. And whether it be $60, and maybe the Reds could donate more in the future if they would start winning, but that's another story. I'm sorry, I'm a Reds fan, okay? But regardless of whether it be $60 or $10,000, we want to thank everyone who's made those donations. If there are no other questions or comments, all in favor signify, accepting the donations signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Thank you. The donations are accepted. Moving on then to our technology fee schedule, updated fees.
Mr. Tidrow, if you'd speak to that, please.
Thank you, Dr. Terrell, as Richmond Community Schools continues to provide mobile devices in classrooms and one-to-one scenarios, breakages, damages, and loss of inventory occur. To offset the cost of parts or devices in the event of total loss of a device, we implemented a student damage recovery fee schedule on July 20th, 2017 during the school board meeting. We come back to the school board to update that fee schedule as follows. And we have two sections. One is for the Apple iPads, and the second section is on laptops. In the laptop section, there are two changes. One is I renamed one of the keyboard sections to touchpad, which is a $35 charge. That's about in the middle of the table there. And then added the laptop case charge of $20 at the very bottom. Recommendation that the board approves the updated student technology fees as listed.
You've heard the presentation and the recommendation. Does anyone want to make the motion to accept the technology fee schedule?
So moved.
The motion made by Member Moore. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Member Robinson. Are there any questions or comments?
Comments.
Member Moore.
Parents, please pay the $40 insurance fee. I'm only saying that because as a parent, I got a letter for $170 and it blew my mind. So that investment in the insurance is well worth it.
It's below $30 this year.
Oh,
so,
really?
per kid.
That's even better. Thank you.
Thank you.
But it's worth that. It's worth it.
To reiterate the comment made by Member Moore, insurance fee. Member Weber?
On the case, are we replacing the R's for free, or how does that work? I know a lot of them, several peeled off.
Some came off. So right now with the new year, when we have new laptop cases, we did not opt to put the R on there. So because it was not successful.
That's
Love
fine.
the look of it, but
Yeah.
some came off.
We're not charging $20 for a lost R.
No.
Just to make
But if you find
We
one,
are not.
We
Let's get that, we are not.
yes, we are not, but if you find one. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, then, all in favor of accepting the technology fee schedule, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it. All right, that concludes the action items, and we'll move on to the board reports and old business.
So this time, we're going to have a report on academic achievement with Dr. Reynolds, and I'd like to invite Mr. Shunnison, Dr. Hartley, and Mrs. Hobbs, if they would join us at the table, please.
Hey Sheila, turn that PowerPoint. It might already be down, I don't know.
it's squared.
Is it up or?
It's the color. It's the black. I see it.
All right. Really just wanted to kind of sit down and talk about our academic achievement, some of the things that we look at frequently. Of course, it's not an inclusive list of our achievement or the data sources that we get, but it's just, again, just an overview of the data we use and how we use some of that data. I think it's important we kind of take a look at some of the lenses prior to talking about our data. Some of the big data pieces that we'll discuss. School grades, that's been in the paper recently, and I've sent you some information out to you about our grades. Of course, a major component of that is iStep, which is transitioning to iLearn. Our big common benchmarking assessment that we use is NWEA. And then, of course, you heard Dr. Hartley and Mrs. Phillips talk some about the teacher data, some of those classrooms assessment, both formal and informal with their common formative assessments that they use within the building, but also, just good teacher work that they observe in their classrooms. Before we go on, I think it's important that we again look at our goals as a district. That we want all schools to be A's and B's, and you have to focus on iStep and now iLearn to do that. we want to continue to look at our teacher data as a part of that triangulation of what we do when we look at student success, and that's embedded in our daily work. And the NWEA, that lofty goal of 90% of our students meeting that growth target. And we'll talk more about what that 90% means a little later when we get more into the NWEA. I sent you this chart last week just as the school grades were hitting the paper across the state. They were approved last week by the Indiana State Board of Education, and you see our trend grades there going back to the 2009-2010 school year. If the grade is red per the state, in that last state column, it has dropped, and the green has risen. Really stayed pretty constant as a district, and obviously you see the two grades that have dropped, but you see that Charles has raised their grade up to a B. Again, I think we've had some discussions in the past about that hold harmless grade. That was the year of the transition to the new assessment of ISTEP, which was, I think, took the state by storm, and they recognized that, and they had a hold harmless grade that year. So that hold harmless year, just as a quick review, that we had, you maintained your grade from 13-14 unless the grade from the new assessment was better than the 13-14 grade, and if that was the case, you got to keep the new 14-15 grade. That was Star was the only one to benefit from that. They had raised their grade from a D to a C in 14-15, so they got to keep that 14-15 grade. The rest of them maintained their grade, or they were held harmless that year.
Now, can we ask questions as we go through?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
What's the significance between the state grade and the federal grade? Why?
Are you looking ahead? You don't look ahead. You're reading ahead of my charts.
It's on the screen.
Well, we're going to get to that.
How far ahead? Can I just?
Right.
Yeah, no, it's just ahead. It's just ahead. It's a great question.
It's your fault. It's colored letters. It draws our eyes.
Maybe I should have made that a little more
That's
gray over there.
interactive, where you click on federal.
Oh man, I'm telling you. The federal is very interesting, but we'll get to it in just a second.
And my question is, what are we doing to improve those grades?
Got that coming too, I bet you.
All right, so
Just wait.
Now that's
So maybe
jumping
let's hold our
forward.
questions till the end. How about
Way
that?
ahead.
you continue on, and then we'll.
Well, just like Jeff said, you put the color up there.
I did. I shouldn't have.
Chuck, just say hold all questions to the end.
Yeah, let's do that.
No.
Let's do that.
I trust myself that I'll get to some places where I'll forget to mention something. Okay. As a sidebar, I think it's important to look at like districts. That's on the next slide. Oh, yes. Like districts, urban districts, similar population, similar demographics. You see kind of A, B, C, and D are different corporations that I can give you. That it's all public knowledge, but I didn't think there's any use of putting their names up there. But you see, we're in the same boat. We face many of the same challenges, have a lot of similar successes that other like corporations have. I think if you just take a quick look at that, you see that we're doing a pretty good job compared to our peers.
And our peers are urban schools.
Urban
and conference
schools.
schools.
The
Yes.
intermediate middles, are those 5/8s or are those 7/8s?
Some are, well, a couple of them were 5/8s, and a couple of them were 6, 7, and 8s. Okay, Jeff. So when we look at the state versus federal, two main components are the same with both of those. They're looking at achievement and they're looking at growth. Grades 3 through 8 and grades 10 for as the assessment at the high school secondary level. And Mike, Corey, Sheila, jump in anytime, please.
You're doing great,
You see him starting to sink?
You see me starting to sink or sweat? Yeah, jump in. For the high school, they have multiple measures which is your college and career readiness and your graduation rate. Again, similar from the state grade and the federal grade, very similar. And I'm going to get to the percentages in just a second. The big difference is in the federal grade, you're capped at 100 points of growth for your school grade. And think about 100 points being like your grading scale. 100 to 90 is an A at those points, but they cap you at 100 for growth. The state does not. If you exceed the projection or the requirements for your growth in the state grades, they will give you bonus points for growth. Our schools that had a B, Charles, Crestdale, and Star, received bonus points. Again, they're not a ton, but they are. I mean, you look at those percentages and how close we are to moving up or down in those grades, and it makes a difference. So,
if I can jump in real
Yep.
quick. And the reason why the state recognizes, and I wish the federal government did, growth is because it goes back to your question about with our preschoolers, and if kiddos are coming in maybe not as prepared as we would like them to be, that is the achievement gap. So what the state is doing is recognizing the work that our teachers are doing to close that achievement gap. So, for example, if you go into grade 2 and by the end of grade 2 you're supposed to be a +1 in achievement, that's your typical growth. Well, if the kiddo is coming in at a -1, our teachers are not only getting them to 0, they're also getting that +1, and the state recognizes the power of closing that achievement gap. So that's the reason for that, the bonus point. So for example, in STAR, when you look at the calculations, in growth, a kiddo might be awarded 75 points overall. The state will double that if the kid has shown growth and growth plus compared to his similar cohort of kiddos. So that goes back to our comparison to like districts. The state puts our kiddos in different cohorts based upon their previous I-STEP scores. And within that cohort, if they've outperformed and shown that growth plus, then the state says, you've done a really good thing right there, and we're going to recognize that. And that levels the playing field with us for kiddos who are coming in maybe other school districts that aren't like ours, that are already school ready, that are going to pass I-STEP regardless. And so their goal is to pass I-STEP plus. So that's the reason behind that. And that's my rub with the federal side of it. I don't want to discredit achievement, but I feel like the federal government, their calculations aren't recognizing the power of growth and closing that achievement gap. And those are, but then on the reverse, the biggest grant that the United States government does is Title I, and the whole purpose of Title I is to close the achievement gap. So it's kind of, to me, it's a little ironic that they don't recognize that.
Now, does this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
Does this, from the Title I funds, does this growth in grade impact those funds at all?
That's what I was gonna ask.
No.
Well, as far as we get additional dollars because of the schools that did not perform with their letter grade where we want them, then we got additional funds to focus in on needs assessment and figuring out as a school how to boast that growth and bolster that achievement.
So then the federal calculation would be a benefit if you need more assessments, if you need more help in your growth.
The way they recognize it is through what he said. They do offer additional money. So for example, Fairview, Vale, and Dennis this year, we submitted a Title I school improvement grant to just do a needs assessment. And we're just in the initial stages of that. But that's how but while that money's nice, it's money I'd rather not be taking.
Right.
And with that, though, a part of that is, so the feds give the state then decides how they're going to divvy up the additional funds that are there for the school improvement grants, whatever that may be. So the federal grade doesn't necessarily help us with that because it's left up to the states to determine how they're going to divvy that up.
So next year, we'll do this needs assessment grant, this initial one, And next year, the whole purpose of this money is to get us ready to apply for a competitive grant that we don't have to, but if we want, we have to compete with other districts to receive those additional dollars past this year for that. So,
Member Moore?
Yeah, well, my question was about money too, but if the federal government continues to see the same grade all the time, then they will reduce some of those funds?
no,
You
not
get the same amount of funds, just not anymore.
we won't get additional funds for school improvement. So for example, the previous 3 years STAR has been the recipient of a school improvement grant. They no longer qualify for that because obviously they've improved they showed 2 years of sustained or improved growth.
But they don't lose any title.
They don't lose any title money. So neither do the funding is based upon student enrollment and the percentage of free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
Member Robinson?
Well, my question is still gonna be, if we're at 80% free and reduced lunch, when are they gonna recognize the fact that we need paid for preschool to close the achievement gap?
It's a wonderful.
Have I
think
mentioned that
Indiana's
Senator
ahead
Rotz
of-
is the chair of the Education Committee this year?
That's right.
And so we'll be working with him to try and continue to push that. So I see you smirking.
Another change or an addition to the federal grade is that they have smaller subgroups. So subgroups move from 30 to 20. So in this case, ELL, English Language Learners, they are measured and they are tracked for the state, but they're not included as part of your grade. In this case, the number is reduced and English Language Learners are included in that grade. Kind of to piggyback on what Dr. Hartley said about that achievement. So our students have to not only perform on those assessments, but then they're also graded on their language proficiency exams. So they have to grow in those as well. So I would say it's inherent that they're going to grow on those exams if they're growing on the assessments, but that's not the case in the federal grade. So they're going to be graded with all the other students in their assessment, and then they're also going to be tracked and monitored through their language proficiency exam, and in our case, it's WIDA.
So I will say that at the beginning of the year when I went to EL, if this gives you any kind of idea, they're going to have to, just like what we've done, change those targets. Preliminary data for 17-18, only 84% of EL students across the state met the target. So now they're working with a group to reassess the psychometrics for the proficiency levels of WIDA, which will then again shift what we're doing here. And where we have kind of a formula of where our students are based on their score. They can score up to a 5, and so if they score a 2, then they get so much time. If they score a 3, they get so much time. This is going to shift everything that we do, because now they're going to change what those levels look like again. And this will be the 3rd time in the 4 years I've done this position. So it's kind of that moving target. My other concern, and we're seeing this as a trend in Richmond, is our brand new students. Those students will count. They will count as part of the testing, so they have to, if a student walks in, they must take the test. And so they count in participation. They won't count in their score. They have to be in the States or in the school system a full year before their score counts. But the student participation will count, as well as their I-STEP will count. So we require brand new English language learners to take I-STEP as well, and that counts.
I also think it's important to note that when their scores do begin to count, the additional resources that it takes to provide them with the things that they need is funded at a percentage rate that is really low. I want to say it's in the 20% range. But just so you understand, yet that's something that is a contributing factor to the overall grades as well.
And interesting enough, I think it's 80% of our English language learners are in the urban district, which are, I forget the percentage of urban districts compared to the state, but the majority of those students, 80% of those students are in urban districts like ours.
Very true.
So, two things. One, the impact of them walking in and taking the test is only really more of a concern for us locally. It doesn't get factored into the grade until after a year in the school system.
Performance.
Right.
Performance, correct.
Okay, then secondly, I'm assuming that on the grade breakdowns by these subgroups for both the state and the federal, by us going to the smaller subgroup, that's probably one of the categories that affects us the most. Because if it doesn't hit that subgroup category in the state, then it's not calculated.
And because
Correct?
we
Yes.
test
So-
WIDA, I'm sorry.
So when we're looking at the grades, and I guess you could pick, there's several of them, but, Star Elementary, there's a 2-letter grade difference there. So in our data can we attribute that a lot of that difference is related to that particular identification in that subgroup?
Their issue with the federal grade was the growth bonus points.
Okay.
So because we
But
have
it
so
does
many,
impact it,
yeah,
too.
because so many of those kids are low, and our teachers are doing such a great job of catching them up and showing that growth. That's why you see the letter grade that they have, but then because that's not recognized at the federal level, that's why you see that grade.
Well, I'm just trying to get at, because part of the board's responsibility, I think, is to align resources off the recommendation of the administration, of course, but, the subgroup category is probably one of the most important areas that we have to monitor. So I'm just trying to see if there's any.
Yeah, and I'll show you the percentages in just a second. It's not as.
Oh, is that on another?
That's on the next slide. You're looking ahead again. I love it. And we'll talk about attendance rates too. Let me get back to that in just a second. I'll show you the percentages and how that breaks down. Attendance is a factor on the federal grade as well, where the mandate is, or the expectation is a 96% attendance rate for at least 80% of your students. Caveat 1 is if they're not at 96%, they need to grow at least by 3% compared to their previous year. So you have 2 ways to reach the 80% compliance. Did you all the way around the barn with that one?
I'm following that. I'm just trying to determine if that hurts us or helps us.
Well, it varies it varies
As a corporation.
as a corporation. Oh, I don't, I can tell you, I do have it in front of me.
Sorry.
But it does, by building it varies, yeah. Okay, so, Jeff, back to your question. Now, looking at our state versus federal percentage breakdown on that pie chart. So, the state is 3 through 8 is 50-50, growth and performance. Again, with the bonus points. So, basically, you have, let's say at, I just looked at STAR. I hate to keep using STAR, but I looked at STAR just a second ago when Corey was talking about the growth that they received. So they received 124 points for growth. So 50% of that plus 50% of their performance, and I think their performance was not as good. I think it was like 40% proficiency for passing the I-step. So they have 50% performance times the 40 and 50% times the growth of 124, and that gets the grade. So when you look at the federal, back to your point, you get to that federal, they cap it 100%. So they received 100% growth, but that's capped at 47 as opposed to above 50. Their performance was the same, less impactful, but then you factor in attendance. And that's if they had no subgroups, okay? And when the subgroups are on the next slide as well. High school, similar. except the growth and the performance is a much smaller slice of the pie. The weight of the grade there you see is in college and career readiness. If you've been around Indiana for the handful of years, you know that that is the focus and has been the focus for a number of years, that students come out college and career ready. We do a great job of that. Lots of opportunities, lots of certification, lots of college credits, and that you see is a part of that grade. The federal side, it's an equal distribution of performance, college and career readiness, and growth, which again, you don't think is a huge deal, but when you're talking about a few points here and a few points there, it really makes a difference in your grades.
Although, from our high school point of view, the 9-12, either calculation makes no difference.
Yeah. They were a part of that 67% in the state that stayed the same for their state to federal grade. You take a look at that next slide. You look at the grade on the left is the standard federal grade, but then you add in subgroups, and again, that reduces the pie. So back what Sheila and I were discussing with you and the ELL students, so now that subgroup becomes 10% of that weight. So it's still less impactful than that growth, but it's still impactful. When you talk about 10% of your growth is, I don't want to say double dipping on students, but it's holding some students double accountable for their performance on two separate assessments.
And that percent is the same regardless if it's 30 students or 60 students.
Yeah, well, it'd be 20 students or 60 students.
20
Right.
students.
Right. Right.
So they're actually calculated in both categories. It is kind of a double whammy that way, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Not kind of.
I mean, those students, if they struggle, they're English language learners and they're trying to do that and take the assessment and take their, I mean, you're hitting them twice. Now, I will say too, there are more subgroups. So you have you'll have white subgroups, African American, free and reduced lunch. So there's subgroups in there, and there's grades associated with those subgroups. Right now, they're not factored in, but I just think it's interesting that they assess those grades right now. So when you look at your federal report card, there's grades for those subgroups. There's not percentages, but there's grades. They're not factored in, but I just think it's a yet.
And for those who have been on the board for a long time, you'll remember back to No Child Left Behind, when the subgroups played big part in
Much
the,
so.
so right now they're just saying they're just there for information, but
I don't believe that.
3 steps forward.
But the subgroups don't affect our federal grade right now.
Right now.
The ELL subgroup does.
If we have more than
Just the ELL, if you have the 20 at the grade level.
And it's not, I clarified with the state today, because we had this conversation. It is 20 within the school now because of the WIDA testing. So, I can get you the data, but I think, all but maybe 2 elementaries will qualify for 20 in the building. So all of our buildings will have that EL subgroup, except for maybe 2 elementaries. And I can get that for you in my next board update.
Thank you.
So that's by building, not by grade level.
Correct. And it's not, because at first, when I went to the training in August, I believed it was the testing grades, like if you had 20 in 3rd and 4th grade at the elementary, but it's not, it's 20 in the building. So, I can think of 2 elementaries that may not hit that. Both our intermediates and our high would have that subgroup for sure.
Okay, so now that I beat you up, let's talk about some of the great things that we're looking at to address that. We're running our needs through that 8-step process. Learning log meetings are happening every month to every 6 weeks, based on the level, where they're having those conversations about those common formative assessments that they're giving. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide too, the common formative assessments and how we use that. You'll see instructional focus for the district. You'll have our literacy, Orton Gillingham training, and the writing process at the secondary level. That really getting down to the core of reading and recognizing that literacy and reading is that cornerstone of everything that we do, and we continue to use that as a focus. The teachers and through committee work and the administrators have identified those power standards each month based on the blueprints for ISTEP, and where we've made in-flight adjustments this year, really starting in June of last year with the blueprints for the iLearn, looking at how we can identify those power standards each month and assess students on those to see how they're doing with those. Success time, that added focus instructional time each day based on students' needs and those standards in math and English at the elementary level, English at the, math at the intermediate level, because they have that extra block of English time that was added a couple years ago. We don't necessarily do a full rotation of English success, but that additional focus time on that standards-based instruction. Again, we continue to monitor. That's an important part of the 8-step process and professional development to address those needs. I think it's an important component that we've really focused on almost 2 years now with work from Dr. Hartley and Mrs. Hobbs on our trauma responsive care for our students and for our adults. I think that's a major block of what we're doing as a district to help our students achieve.
Chuck, specifically with the 8 steps, I mean, how do we measure if that's successful? I mean, if our grades have remained constant, and we've done 8 steps for that time, what other measures are telling us that 8 steps is what we need to be doing? I mean, maybe there's a different program that better meets our district's needs than 8 steps, because if you look at the grades and you look at 8 steps, I mean.
Well, I think it's important for a couple of things. I think it's really broad, and to say that the 8-step process is the magic key. It's not. It's just the framework to do
I mean, it's a continuous improvement practice that came out of industry.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't use it like that, really.
Well, we do. I mean, in the fact that it's a plan, do, check, act, that business model, right? And as you look at that chart, grades remain constant, you know, which is good. And we continue to face more challenges, more at-risk students, more problems are being brought into the schools, and we continue to remain constant. So I'd argue the fact that while I'm not happy about remaining constant, I still think that is steady progress to remain constant. If you go back to that hold harmless grade, we've improved a pretty good deal since that since the implementation of the 8-step process. I think of the 10 grades, 6 improved since that hold harmless year, and then and the one school this year has gone down, but the other 3 remain the same as a district.
Chuck, can I chime in on that
Yeah.
too? Is that one of the things that's frustrating, in my opinion, Mr. Weber, is that we have seen in education the last several years the constant changeover of educators, just the free flowing of people leaving the profession wholeheartedly or moving, to neighboring districts to get pay raises or whatever the reasons are. I mean, it's a tough business to be a teacher. And so in my opinion, the one thing that the 8-step process has really allowed us to do is to set a framework by which during the school day, we can have great conversations amongst teachers and administrators about what they're seeing in their classrooms and trying to continue to support one another to help kids be successful. So I think that's been huge, especially for our turnover as teachers have come into the district, whether they're veteran teachers or new teachers alike, is that learning log meeting time, the ones that I have sat in on this year, I can see the changes already taking place within the district of teachers being more and more comfortable to be reflective and providing or looking for support from either their colleagues or their administrators on how to improve, as opposed to feeling like I've got to shut my door and work in isolation and then just kind of hope that this is going to work out. So although it is a plan, do, check model, to me, the biggest part about it has been those learning log meetings and that open dialogue, because we just need to support each other so much because of that turnover factor. And it's hard to quantify that, but I can only imagine what it could look like if we didn't have a structure in place to have those meetings. We may not have even kept the status quo, especially with the change in the assessment and looking at what that grade would have been without that hold harmless, and maybe seeing a downward trend. I can only imagine what it might have looked like in some of our buildings. I can speak at least on the secondary level. I don't know about Dr. Hartley and the valuable conversations that the elementary has, but I think we saw some of that snippets of that today in that video from Charles, and that direct correlation between that opportunity to find time for pairs to talk to each other, teachers to talk to each other, and teachers to talk with paras. And that is a part of the 8-step process. And quite honestly, I'm not sure how much of that was going on prior to that process being here. I can't speak to that because I wasn't here. So.
And it's not a mystery or aren't other things that would do that, but it's just the vehicle that we've chosen. I think to go along with those conversations, I think it's afforded us the opportunity to look at those instructional calendars every year, multiple times throughout the year. We spent 4 days at the end of the year diary making changements and adjustments based on the NWEA and the common formative assessments and the blueprints for the I-STEP. It just affords us those opportunities to have those conversations.
And I have looked ahead, and I think it's important to note that the I-STEP is just one leg of the triangulation of data that we look at to assess whether our students are growing and showing the achievement that they need to with that ever-changing at-risk population as well. So I think it's real important. While, yes, I-STEP is what we're measured by the state, we can't put so much into just that's it. That determines, because there are so many great things, so much growth that is happening with our kids, and that's why we use the other resources, the other ways to measure academic growth as well.
And within that grade, there's so many intangibles that's not even noted. For example, today I watched a girls' drone club and watched this little girl land this drone on a dime in the middle of the gymnasium, a 3rd grader, with two Richmond firemen there showing them their heat sensors and doing all kinds of things. So none of those things come as a result of the protocols that our principals are using and our teachers are using within the building, that continuous quality improvement cycle, but none of those things are reflected in the grade. And do I want all of our buildings to be A? Yes, I do. Am I going to continue to work towards that? Yes, I am. But I don't want to lose sight of a name of a process, throwing things out. And there's just so many great things that aren't measured by anything that you even see up there that we have listed. Just right next to that drone club, there were at least 8 teachers spending their own time in an art room making Christmas ornaments so that every kid, when they leave for Christmas break, is going to be able to take a personalized ornament home from their teacher. Those are, education is so much more than our grade. Our grade is important, I don't deny it, but I also, I get a little feisty when we forget the intangibles.
And that's why in our evaluation tool that we put the grade level, or the grade that is given to our buildings at such a low percent, because just like we don't want to evaluate our teachers based off of it, we don't want to evaluate the success or the effectiveness of our educational process or environment that we create for our students either.
Dixie?
Well, I think the other thing we have to remember too is that iSteps come with its own set of flaws that have been fairly numerous. And they've also changed the bar several times, which throws your data off.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
And this year, we don't even, with iLearn, we don't even know what the bar is yet.
yeah.
We've worked to make our best guess. We know the standards haven't changed, but we really don't even know what that mark is. We've gone through the documents, the building level principals have done an outstanding job of trying to get through that. We've done things to help support them, but right now, we don't really know what that bar is, even going into the spring.
Well, and I think that's another
Yeah.
good reason why we need to look at multiple areas.
That's a perfect transition to my next slide. Talking about the next assessment, transitioning to that new assessment, I don't, you have to take a look at that. But kind of to go with what Dixie said, you don't even know what the bar is going to be yet with this new assessment. We'll talk a little more about that bar and our current assessment when we look at NWEA in a minute. But as we prepare to transition to the new assessment, we have attended a few sessions around the state on the iLearn. I think we're in pretty good shape because it's an adaptive test, and it's going to be very similar to the NWEA that we already give. So kids won't go through, and if they struggle, they're going to struggle through the whole thing. It will adjust for them, or if they're starting to excel, that it will adjust and make questions more difficult. We had a lot of discussion about how we wanted to address it. We said, you know what, the state standards are not changing, unlike they did a few years ago. And we're going to stick with the state standards. We're going to go with the guidance that they've given us thus far as a blueprint to the assessment, and continue to teach to those standards. The one change we did make through those common formative assessments that we give each month, we're going to have some higher order thinking questions on there to help prepare kids for what we believe is coming on that on the new iLearn assessment. So again, it's not that we put all of our eggs in that basket, but I think you're foolish if you don't address those things. They're still based on state standards, which our folks are teaching. Next one, I don't know, I can't do it right down. And really looking at our bigger picture in our district, we use the NWEA as a benchmark assessment. It's a nationally norm referenced assessment that is used to evaluate students in English, reading, and English, reading, and math. The example you have there is math from the fall. What we can do with this assessment is we look at proficiency. So how are the 3rd through 8th grade students performing based on that fall assessment on that test? Dixie, to your point, that proficiency you see on the bottom is our 3 through 8 proficiency. So based on this, we have 53% of our students not proficient based on that fall assessment. So likely are going to struggle and not pass, well, the old I-step, right? So we have that data, we're looking at that data and we use that data to assess the needs for our students and help change that pie to more yellow and blue. The problem is to know, is proficient enough? A few years ago, proficient, if you hit that proficient mark, you were going to pass the I-step 100%. Well, now we know it's closer to 65%. You have to be not at proficient, but 65%. You got to be just above proficient to have an opportunity to pass the I-step. So you kind of you worry about that with the new changeover from I-step to iLearn. that top, I put the top piece in there because it looks at ACT and college readiness, and that's 5 through 8. You see that we have some work to do there. And I show you that to kind of scare you a little bit, to think about the need that we have, but also remember that the high school's a B, right? So, and the majority of that assessment is based on college and career readiness. So by the time those folks get through the Richmond Community Schools, they're prepared to move on. So,
What's track mean? On track 22, track 24. That first chart.
in the first column,
In the heading,
That's that
In the heading.
65%
grades,
you're
student
talking
count,
about.
not
Oh.
on track 22, on track 24.
I'm sorry,
You see what we're talking about?
nope.
Right here.
Oh, oh, gotcha. I'm sorry. I was not. I was looking at all the bold print. I'm like, I don't see that. That on track to be college and career ready, per an ACT assessment.
Okay.
So what's the blue on track
What's the-
24? What's
yeah.
the difference between on track 22 and on track 24?
I believe that would be on track would be a pass plus, scoring I think at least a 24, and on track would be scoring between a 20 and a 24. Dr. Hartley, would you assume that's correct?
24 and 24 plus in the blue.
Yeah.
So on the bottom piece, the 2 through 8, you have, your first column is the did not pass, your second column is pass.
Yeah.
And you have referenced that, and those are strictly off of NWEA?
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are your great question. So those are your NWEA scores, and based on those NWEA scores from the fall of 2018, that percentage would pass or pass plus.
So that doesn't, so you made a statement a few minutes ago that you have to be at 65% to stand the possibility of passing I-STEP. So that would actually increase our did not pass categories then?
So basically what we had seen in the past with the old I-STEP was if we could get kids to the 50th percentile, then
That's why I
they would be
50th
projected to pass I-STEP. Now what we're seeing is that we have to really get kids somewhere between the 60th and 65th percentile. 65th percentile was like our guarantee. If we got a kid to the 65th percentile, then they would pass I-STEP.
So is that reflective on this column?
Yes.
Yes.
So that,
'Cause that's a
the
report.
column between the do not and the pass is now set at 65%?
65th percentile.
Or 65th
I misled you on
percentile.
that. 65th percentile as in the national average. So before you were smack dab on the 50th percentile, right? Average, you were going to pass the
If you're
I-STEP.
in the top 35%, you'll pass.
Yeah. Now, you have to be in the top 35% to pass.
So two things to note. One, this is fall data.
It's fall data.
So this is at the beginning of the school year. So it's the predictor for it. The other thing that I think, to go back, John, to your point with that we've stayed pretty much status quo with the grades that we're receiving. The other thing that you need to realize is when the Indiana standards were changed, how many years ago? 2?
Well, we're in year 4 now.
Okay. Before they were changed, based off of the national assessments that we participate in as a state, we were 14%, we were in the top 14% of all states in our country in how we performed in English and math. Yet we decided, the state decided that we needed to increase our standards and make it that much more difficult. So therefore, the pass rate went up, was impacted because we increased what those standards are. So to say that while we're staying status quo, our at-risk population is going up, the change in the standards making them more difficult went up as well. I would tell you that staying status quo is pretty good, especially if you go back and compare where we are to like districts, similar districts.
So we just basically, you're saying we had growth just to meet with the increased standard?
Absolutely.
And just to finish up that test,
sure.
so we're at like 40, if you add the pass and pass plus, we project to have 46% pass.
And it really, it's really accurate. I mean, the NWEA and the projected to pass has been frighteningly accurate. Okay, on the next slide, we'll let you monitor show you some of the growth data that we look at. Now this is fall to 17 to fall 18. So individual students and cohorts. A couple things to look at. So the diamond would be the projected growth that they were to meet, and the blue is our achievement. Right. So if you notice too, I think you see how it kind of diminishes. The growth diminishes. Just in general, the points students grow shrinks. You know, they tend to grow a lot at the earlier assessments, and then of course as they get older, the growth slows a little bit. So I guess that's why the diamonds kind of veer off down to the right. But again, an example of some of the assessment data that we look at with that assessment. On the next chart, you'll see on the next slide, you'll see a quadrant summary of a classroom. Basically, you want to stay out of that pink section. So pink section would be low performance and low growth, right? So you basically want to stay out of that. You ideally want to have high performance and high growth, but at the very minimum, one of the two. So again, this is one of the charts that we look at from our level. We look at it as a grade level, as a school, and at the classroom level, and then at the building level, and even at the teacher level. But then at the building level, they really take the time to go down, have those learning log meetings, and have that discussion at the teacher level for their classroom. Okay.
What's the legend? Well,
What's the squares versus the diamonds?
One
There's
is
two different
reading and one is language usage.
I'm sorry, say it again.
One is reading and one is language usage. So you can, on the right-hand side, you can turn on and off for a class what you want to look at. So like math has been turned off on that particular teacher's group of kids. Reading and language are on. You'd have to hover over which one is which.
When I'm looking
So
at
this is one classroom?
Yeah, that's one class.
And the point is not so much as necessarily where the kids are at, but the idea that this is a tool that we use and how we go from a broad district level down to a building level to a classroom level, and then you'll see the next slide down to an individual student
level.
So like on this
information directly impacts what they're doing in the classrooms and the instructions taking place.
And so one thing that we've done with that is we've taken that vertical line that's at the 50th percentile, and you can actually physically move it over to like the 60 or 65th percentile. So if you did that, you would see that there's 4 kids that are purple squares that would be below that 65th percentile. So those are kind of your bubble kids, where in the past, we would have thought, okay, those kids are golden, literally, they're gonna be okay for I-STEP. But now we would know that they actually would fall on the left-hand side of that that 65th percentile. And so those kids, more than likely, in the reading part of I-STEP, in the past, because we don't know about I-LEARN now, most likely would not have passed I-STEP.
So the 65th percentile works in both directions, both ends.
Correct. So you move the one on the x-axis because of the achievement.
Right, so you'd have 2 diamonds there that were on the bubble.
Yeah.
Continue. And then on that final slide, we have down to the student achievement. We're clear down where you're looking at the individual student. You see their longitudinal data dating back from their first assessment. And it's kind of interesting, just if you look at a distance at it, you see that the fall, winter, spring kind of heads up the mountain, have a little summer learning loss dip, hopefully head up the mountain again, have the spring, and then you see our fall 18 assessment we've given there. Smaller dip, and then you see the projected growth in the dotted lines that the folks will be expected to meet.
So on this particular report, again, it's a student report, and every kid has one that's taken NWA. So you can actually click by math, reading, language arts, and you can drill down to specific bundles of concepts or standards by which the kids are. Well, really what NWA does is it shows you where kids are instructionally ready to receive whatever that instruction would be. So whether or not they're in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, it'll break that down off that report. What are some particular skills that kid needs, and then teachers can group those students within their classroom. We can group them in success time based off of their individual needs pretty granularly off of that report. That's one of the reports that's basically a student report.
And the parent report that goes home is similar to this. It has a few more descriptors in there. It's fairly easy to read as far as being color-coded and following the tracks of...
So if I look at this, I see the red is I-STEP did not pass. I see I-STEP pass and I-STEP pass plus. So what's the yellow and the orange represent?
Bubble. They'd be close.
So is that the 50th to 65th percentile?
Well, I would assume that yes. So I think that those are based on the actual data, as opposed to what we're seeing, what we believe is that bar moving up. So similar to that previous picture, those students are still predicted to pass, or the yellow and orange would be a bubble kid that could pass but are still close.
So that really didn't answer my question.
So that is based.
So that coincides with the RIT score. So if you look over on the left-hand side, you may not be able to read it very well, but that kind of gives a RIT score for that student, and we would equate that RIT score with correct. If they were in that orange to yellow RIT range, we would be very apprehensive about them passing the I-STEP. In this particular case it'd be language arts. It'd be part of their English language arts.
But I believe it is based on current data. It has been pretty accurate the last two administrations of it. But I think the NWEA would tell you too that they would argue that they've not had enough data with this new I-STEP assessment to say, yeah, it's on it, accurate.
Member Weber?
So the colors are the averages. I mean, just the data points for the red and the orange and. Right.
Oh, yeah. As far as.
I mean, how we're comparing the student in black to.
Yeah, and this particular student, they're a high achieving student.
So
I mean, they're in the blue.
I guess my question is, so something happened between winter 18 and spring 18. I mean, that's when they got into the blue. I mean, can we go back and do some? I mean, can we look at what techniques particularly worked? I mean, I'd like to see the colors the rest of the way, but it, he was in line that first test, and he made a jump, or she made a jump, and then has maintained it into the blue.
Mm-hmm.
Something helped that student make that jump.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And we've looked at some of that data on the individual kid, and we've gone back and they've had someone die in their family. They've missed significant days of school. So yeah, when you pull that report and you look at an individual kid, teachers and administrators do that to try to figure out, okay, what is going on, or do we see a trend within that whole class, or is it just particular to a kid?
That's part of those learning log meetings as well. It's like, wow, what have you been doing the last 12 weeks to have student growth well above the average,
And
or
it's
well
the same-
above the
The
prediction?
same thing with the conversation with a kid who had maybe third, fourth, fifth grade had pretty consistent growth, and then all of a sudden in seventh grade, their growth just tanked. And then during a test talk meeting with the kid, trying to find out, okay, what is it that's going on?
I mean, I understand we can easily identify those drops, but I'm more interested in the improvements. Can we identify, was that a teaching technique? Was that, a change in building? Was that a?
Yep. And that's part of those learning log meeting discussions. So they go back and is that pinpointed down to a student? It's like kind of to go back to that negative. I mean, did something just click for a student, or is it the instructional practices in that particular classroom? Like, oh my gosh, they had.
So for instance,
Mr. Shaughnessy,
one of the questions that we ask in a learning log meeting is where would you want to celebrate or a success that you've seen within this time frame of instruction? Where are some of those positive trends? And then one of the things that we ask teachers to do is, okay, your class had significant growth within this standard. What type of instructional practices did you do? Oh, you know what, I really found out that if I group my students based off of this, I found them to work better together. And then, then that's like a strategy share. And so then they might team teach, or that teacher may model for the other teacher, or the administrator or team may help with another teacher figure out, okay, if that's working for you, then I could try that too.
So
That is actually built into the learning log conversation.
So real briefly, to answer your question, yes, we can, but it depends on who does it. So I don't necessarily look at an individual student, but a principal will. I will look at trends from classroom and have those kind of discussions. But I feel very confident with where we're at and the processes and protocols in place that we can go back and look at successes like what you're asking, principals, and have those conversations. And so just yesterday I was in the building for different reasons, but they were having one of the protocol meetings, and one of the things, the conversation was to just that, the success of, it was the LLI kids, for one kiddo or group of kiddos, it was very successful, utilized by the same teacher, but we also saw that it wasn't successful for another kid within the same classroom, and the reason why is because the LLI kid was just a level above. We were using the lowest kit we had, a kindergarten kit, but that was still not at the kiddo's instructional level, but we know that so then we went back with this kiddo to a different strategy with some Orton Gillingham, but we knew that other groups of kiddos that it was successful, so we bumped them forward, and so we look for like pockets or cohorts of kiddos. So long and short of it, I feel confident that we can.
Dixie?
I'm going to ask the same question I've asked for 8 years. What happens at 6th grade? Because every single year, 6, 7, and 8 dip. Looks like 5th grade was doing pretty good.
Keith might have any.
So, observation-wise,
Transitions stink. I mean,
True,
I think transitions stink.
And it's
But
across the
fifth gra-
state.
Yeah,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So is it it's a conundrum to me. Is it in the testing, do you think, or what is it? Because these other schools that you showed are showing the same thing.
Well-
But the 5th grade's okay, so if we took 5th grade out of intermediate school, what would happen to the school grade?
I think a lot of it, Ms. Robinson, is that kids have more on their mind than their reading and writing and arithmetic.
What?
When they start getting into 6th grade.
We're gonna get gross.
I don't want to get that much.
I'm not going to that area, but
But even with our own
wherever you
buildings,
would
we
make
have
that-
traditions.
I think wherever you would make that initial first cut, so to speak. So if we were a K-8 building, I think you would see that drop in that 9th and 10th grade. I think wherever you make that cut. I've seen it, so I was a principal of of a 5-6 building with 1,300 kids. And so our fifth grade, coming in fifth grade was, it was traumatic. I mean, really for parents, for kids, teacher, all of us. It's like, here these kids were the prior year performing well, and there's a transition. And then when they would go into seventh grade, we would see, I mean, it would be like this. It was this mountain peak that from fifth to sixth, really strong, and then boom. So I think, I don't want to minimize it, but I think that's a huge part of it. Wherever you put a transition for kiddos, I've seen the same transition from an elementary that was a K2 building to a 3, 4, 5 building. There's a transition and there's a dip. So I think that's a piece of it. I don't think it's the overall, but.
But the fifth grade looked like it was I mean, it wasn't
I
great,
think-
but it was okay. It was
The
better than
mathematics chart
six.
You showed us, the sixth grade, I mean,
Yeah,
the sixth grade performs well below where you would think they would be,
right.
where fifth grade is
Yeah, it's-
marginally below.
Yeah. I just, it's been that way forever, and I just don't get it. Because it doesn't happen at the ninth grade particularly.
And I know that Mr. Shaughnessy is in particularly distressed about the performance of the intermediate buildings. But, you look at the other like districts across the state. and-
Yeah. So I can't figure out, is it in the testing? Or somebody needs to do a research project on
The lines checked every.
Retirement project for you, Dixie.
it.
Dr. Reynolds, do you want to give us a summary?
No, I think we really kind of hit those things
He got
throughout.
Thanks,
Well, I got one more question.
Yeah.
As we go through the data, we're always looking for causes, for reasons. And I think, and I don't want to use the word justifications. So, are we to the point now that we collect that data and we track it back to attendance? That we, if you look at a period of time, do we track it back to attendance? Do we track it back to the amount of time that a teacher is not in the classroom for that period of time? I mean, are we, the number of times the students pulled out of class for necessary things. I mean, that's one of the common things that I hear is a lot of times the kids that need the instruction the most are being pulled out for other stuff that they need. So, I mean, is that tracked? Is that, I mean, because if we have a teacher that would go on leave for 2 weeks, a month, or have a high absenteeism rate, I mean, we pull staff out of the classroom quite a bit for professional development. So tracking those types of things, have we started at that level, tracking it and trying to correlate it to?
I think that student achievement is so broad. Yes, we do. We
Well,
look
I
at,
mean,
we look at,
if we're trying to measure a growth from a specific period, from winter to, from fall to winter, I mean, we also would be, I would think, would want to be able to measure those other statistics against it.
yeah. Yeah, we do look at those. We track, I get weekly reports from suspensions and in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions. I get weekly reports on those, and we have conversations about that. Working on Swiss data, we pulled the amount of teachers or the amount of times that we pull folks out of the classroom. We do look at that.
So that is actually logged?
Yeah.
Because
It
that
actually
would be,
came into less than 1%. Actually, I think it was less than a third of 1% of the time that our teachers miss out of the classroom for PD.
Because there's just you think it's more, but you have 350 teachers every day.
I was talking about students pulled out for services.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about.
I know at the elementary level, we know exactly every student, when they're pulled out, how long they're pulled out, how many days of the week they're pulled out. That's part of what they look at.
Because it would be.
Based on their need, who monitors that, whether it's a 504 or a.
When we went to the 8-step process, part of what we did is tried to align everything with success time so that kids weren't getting pulled out of core instruction. Now, we have some kids who are 2 and 3 grade levels below that could sit in core instruction and get absolutely nothing. So they are getting pulled out. Those are few and far between at this point. But most of our intervention for those special populations are happening during success time, and that all happened through that 8-step process.
Which is the big part of having a common language across buildings and grade levels.
And so like, for example, today, the video that we saw, none of those kiddos missed core instruction, nor did they miss any IEP minutes.
So in summary of this evening, I came across a very interesting dissertation that was very well written, and I'd love to share it with all of you based on data-driven instruction.
Yours?
Maybe. So,
That sounds like an executive session type of meeting to me.
Sounds
I
like
think
a
we can
shameless.
keep going for another. I've got at least an hour PowerPoint presentation ready to go right now on it.
Thank you very much, and again, for the presentation, but also, one of the hard facts of it is, as I was sharing with Dr. Terrell, is the fact that a lot of the things that aren't included in here, the dip at 5th grade, the trauma.
Sixth grade.
6th grade, the trauma that a student encounters, you know, that causes a dip in behavior as well as in classroom performance, the outlying factors that occur outside of our buildings that we really have no opportunity to have a direct input on. But we applaud, you know, we've got, obviously, you know, according to this, we still have work to do, a lot of work to do, everything. And I know that our teachers are doing that every day. It's too bad, unfortunately, we can't grade a lot of the parents and the other people who could see this as well and see what their role in the successes or the declines are too. So that's my caveat for that. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Reynolds. And Mr. Shunnison and Dr. Hartley and Mrs. Hobbs for your presentation. So at this time, we'll move on. Next on the agenda is the preview of upcoming meetings and events.
Main thing I just want to bring to your attention is all of the Christmas programs that are going on. Just Bridget puts that in her update every couple of weeks. Make sure you check that out. And I know our administrators and teachers and students would love to see you at any of those that you can make.
Thank you. And if you get the opportunity, again, remind you over the next few weeks prior to going on our holiday breaks, if you get the opportunity, go in and visit the kids, visit the teachers, just walk through and see the success stories that are going on every day, and see the smiles on the face of the kids when you come in and you get to meet them. It makes a huge difference, not only in their life but yours as well. So,
bell ringer we did earlier because Dr. Hartley jumped on, and great bell ringer.
Well, you know, speaking of Dr. Hartley, I'll give him this, I'll give a kudo out, a bell ringer to him, because on November the 10th, he turned 243 years old.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else, we stand adjourned.